I didn't know these existed.
For 20 years, my brother got in his car every Sunday morning and disappeared for the whole day. 2 hours there, 2 hours back. Every Sunday, in rain, in snow, on Christmas, on his own birthday. He never told anyone where he went. Not me, not our mother before she passed. Not a single soul in 59 years of life. I used to think the worst things about those drives. I'm ashamed of that now, because 3 weeks ago, my brother died. And when I went to clean out his car, I finally found out where he'd been going every Sunday for 20 years, and it broke me open in a way I'm still not put back together from. My name is Mike Sullivan. I'm 56 years old. I've been a mechanic my whole life. 40 years with my hands inside engines, in a garage just outside Pittsburgh. I'll tell you something about my trade that matters for this story. A car cannot lie to you. People lie all the time. They'll swear they never redline it, never skip an oil change, never take it off-road. But the car tells the truth. The wear tells the truth. The miles tell the truth. You learn to read a vehicle like a diary, and it'll tell you everything about how a person really lived, no matter what they say. My brother Gene lied to all of us for 20 years about those Sundays. But he could never lie to his car. And in the end, it was the car that told me who my brother really was. Before I tell you, do me one small kindness. If you've ever misjudged someone you loved, decided you knew them, when you didn't know the half of it, tap subscribe. It's free, and it tells me this story found the right person. And stay to the end, because I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to tell me about the quiet ones in your own life. Let me tell you about Gene. Gene was my older brother, 3 years older, and about as different from me as two brothers can be. I was loud, I married young, I had kids and grandkids, and a house full of noise. Gene was the quiet one, never married, no children. He lived alone in a small, tidy house, worked as a machinist at the same plant for 35 years, kept to himself, and carried something behind his eyes that none of us could ever name. We used to worry about him, a man that alone, that closed. Our mother, right up until she died, would say, "I just wish your brother would let somebody in." He wasn't cold, understand. That's what made it so confusing. Gene was the kindest man in any room. He'd give you the coat off his back, fix your car for free, sit up all night if you were sick. He was gentle with my kids in a way that made me think, more than once, what a father he'd have been. But there was a wall in him, a room he kept locked, and none of us ever got the key. He'd come to Sunday dinners, the ones he could make, and he'd be warm and present, and then, right on schedule, he'd get quiet and check his watch, and something behind his eyes would close, and you knew he was already somewhere else. We thought it was loneliness. We thought it was the accident, that he'd never quite gotten over it. We had no idea it was the opposite of loneliness. We had no idea he was the least alone of any of us. We didn't know he already had let someone in. Just not any of us. The Sunday thing started about 20 years ago. I remember because it was right around the time of the accident. I'll get to the accident. All of a sudden, Gene had somewhere to be every Sunday. He'd leave at dawn and come back after dark. And if you asked him where he'd been, he'd get this closed look, and he'd say, "Just had some things to take care of," and change the subject so completely you felt rude for having asked. And it was every Sunday. That's the part that's hard to make people understand. Not most Sundays. Every Sunday, for 20 years, without one exception I ever knew of. Blizzards that closed the schools, Gene went. The Sunday after our mother's funeral, when I figured surely he'd stay, Gene went. He was in the hospital once himself, years back, for his gallbladder, and I swear to you he timed the surgery for a Tuesday, so he'd be out by the weekend. A man will do that for very few things in this life. A job won't get that out of you. Only two things will make a man drive through a blizzard on the anniversary of his own mother's death. The thing he loves most, or the thing he can't forgive himself for. In Gene's case, and I know this now, it was both at once, and they were the same drive. At first I figured he had a lady friend somewhere. Good, I thought. Gene deserved someone. But years went by, and he never brought anyone around, never mentioned anyone, and the Sundays never stopped. So then I started thinking darker things. I'm not proud of them. I wondered if he had a gambling problem, driving to some casino 2 hours off. I wondered, God forgive me, if he was mixed up in something. Once, at a family barbecue, when Gene left early on a Sunday like always, I made a joke. I said, "Where's Gene really go every week, huh?" Second family. And everybody laughed. And Gene, who was halfway to his car, stopped for just a second. Just a second. And then he kept walking. I've thought about that second 1,000 times since. Because here's the thing that ate at me for 2 decades. Those Sundays cost him. He missed things. He missed my daughter's christening because it fell on a Sunday. He missed our mother's birthday dinner one year because it was a Sunday and he had to be somewhere. I was angry at him about that one for a long time. Our own mother, and he couldn't move whatever it was for one Sunday. I said something to him about it, something hard. He just took it. He apologized, and he looked like he wanted to explain, and then he didn't, and he went anyway. And it wasn't just the missed dinners. It was a slow thing, a resentment that built up over years, the way water wears a groove in stone. Every time Gene left early, every time he wouldn't say where, every time he got that closed look, I filed it away as one more piece of evidence that my brother had decided some private thing mattered more than his own blood. When our mother was dying, in her last months, I found myself thinking bitter things, that Gene still ran off on his Sundays even then, that he couldn't give the woman who raised him a few extra hours at the end. I never said it to him, but I thought it. I sat by our mother's bed and I thought, where the hell is my brother? And I judged him for it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, is that Gene was, on those very Sundays, doing the most selfless thing a human being can do. That the man I was judging for abandoning his family was 2 hours away, holding up a family he'd broken, out of a love so private and so heavy he couldn't share the weight of it with anyone. I spent 20 years quietly believing my brother was selfish, that he had some private thing he cared about more than his own family. That's the story I told myself, because it was the only story that fit what I could see. I had it exactly backwards. All of it. If you're still with me, do me that kindness and tap subscribe before I tell you about the accident, because the accident is where the whole truth begins. 20 years ago, on a winter night, Gene was driving home from a late shift, and the roads were bad, black ice, the kind you can't see. And at an intersection, Gene's truck slid through a red light, and it hit another car. The man in the other car was named David Reyes. He was 31 years old. He was driving home to his wife and his little girl, and he died at the scene. It destroyed my brother. I need you to understand, it was ruled an accident, the ice, no charges. The investigators said there was nothing Gene could have done, that anyone would have slid on that ice. But Gene never accepted that for one single day of the rest of his life. He had taken a man's life, a young father, and it didn't matter to Gene what the report said. In his heart, he had made a wife a widow and a little girl fatherless, and that was a debt that a no charges ruling could never, ever settle. I remember the weeks after. Gene stopped eating near enough. He'd sit at his kitchen table staring at nothing. I come over and try to talk to him, tell him what the investigators told all of us. Black ice, no fault. It could have been anyone. It could have been me. And he gnawed, and I could see the words going in and finding nothing to hold on to. Once, and only once, he said something about it that I didn't understand at the time. He looked at me, hollow-eyed, and he said, "There was a car seat, Mikey, in the back of his car. Empty, thank God, but I saw it. There was a car seat." And then he wouldn't say anything more. I thought it was just the horror of the scene talking. I know now it was the beginning of everything. He'd already started thinking about the child. I knew about the accident, of course. The whole family did. Gene went quiet for months afterward, and we all thought, in time, he'd heal, the way people do. We thought he put it behind him. He went back to work. He stopped talking about it. And the Sunday drive started, and none of us, not one of us, ever connected the two things. Why would we? He never said a word. Gene died 3 weeks ago. A heart attack, in his sleep, alone in that tidy little house. 59 years old. The doctor said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, and I've held on to that. I was his only close family left, so it fell to me to handle everything. The house, the arrangements, and the car. His car was a 12-year-old sedan, nothing special, that he kept immaculate. And a few days after the funeral, I went over to clean it out before I sold it, because that's a thing you have to do, and nobody tells you how heavy it is, sitting in the driver's seat that still smells like your brother, going through the last ordinary things of a life. And this is where being a mechanic changed everything. Because I got in that car, and out of 40 years of habit, I looked at the odometer, and the number stopped me cold. The mileage was enormous. Far too high for a retired man who lived 10 minutes from everything he needed. I sat there, and I did the math in my head, the way I do with customers' cars. And a 200-mile round trip, once a week for 20 years, is more than 200,000 miles. This car, and I checked the service records he kept in a glove box in his neat handwriting, was on its third set of tires from the same shop, rotated like clockwork, and the mileage told the story of one thing and one thing only: a long, identical trip made over and over and over for years. The car couldn't lie. My brother had driven the same long road every single week for 2 decades, and it was all still there in the vehicle if you knew how to read it. So I started reading the rest of it. In a glove box, under the service records, there was a road atlas, the paper kind from before everybody had a phone. And it fell open by itself to one page, the spine cracked and soft from 1,000 openings, and there was a route drawn on it in pen, faded, traced over so many times the ink had worn through the paper. A route to a town 2 hours south that I'd never once heard my brother mention. In the trunk, folded under the spare, there was a child's booster seat. Old, the kind you'd use for a little kid. In my bachelor brother's car, I sat down on the curb when I found that one, and I held in my lap this little worn booster seat, and I could not for the life of me make it fit any story I had about my brother. A man with no children, no nieces or nephews small enough to need it, who'd kept a child's seat in his trunk for years. And behind the sun visor, when I flipped it down, a stack of photographs fell into my lap. Photographs of a little girl. The same little girl over years, first a toddler, then a gap-toothed kid, then a teenager, then a young woman in a graduation cap. 20 years of a child growing up, photographed from a distance in some of them, up close in others, and my brother, who never had a child, had kept every one of them tucked above his head where he'd see them every time he drove. I didn't understand yet, but I was starting to, and my hand was shaking. There was more. A shoebox in the back seat, full of things, a child's crayon drawings going back years, the earliest ones just scribbles, addressed in a shaky little kid hand to Uncle Gene. Report cards, a dozen years of them, kept like treasures. I remember one had a teacher's note that said "a joy to have in class," and someone, my brother, had underlined it. A friendship bracelet, the kind kids make, faded and worn like he'd carried a long time. A ticket stub from a school play. A program from high school graduation 2 years ago with a name circled in that same neat hand, Sophia Reyes. Reyes. I sat in my dead brother's car with that graduation program in my hands, and the name Reyes went through me like cold water. And I finally understood what my brother had been doing every Sunday for 20 years. He'd been going to them, the family, the wife and the little girl of the man who died on the ice. I got in my own car, and I opened that worn atlas on the seat beside me, and I drove the route my brother had driven 1,000 times. 2 hours south. And I'll be honest with you, I cried most of the way, because with every mile I understood a little more of what those miles had meant and how wrong I'd been for 20 years about the best man I ever knew. It's a strange thing, driving a dead man's route. I watched the highway signs he must have known by heart. I passed the gas station where his receipts said he always stopped, and I stopped there too, and I thought about him standing at that pump 1,000 Sunday mornings, alone, 2 hours from home, 2 hours from where he was going, carrying his secret in both directions. I thought about the weather he'd driven through, the snow, the ice, the very kind of ice that started all of this, and how he'd never once let it stop him. 20 years, 1,000 Sundays, and I'd spent them resenting him. Every mile of that drive was another mile of an apology I'd never get to make to his face, and I made it anyway, out loud, to the empty passenger seat the whole way down. The route ended at a modest house on a quiet street in a small town, and I sat outside in my car for a long time before I could make myself go up and knock, because I didn't know what I'd find. I didn't know if they'd even know who I was. All I had was a name and 20 years of my brother's silence. A young woman opened the door, early 20s, and I knew her face instantly because I just spent an hour looking at 20 years of photographs of it. The little girl from the visor, Sophia Reyes, grown up. I said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Mike Sullivan. I think you knew my brother, Gene." And this young woman's face just crumpled, and she said, "Uncle Gene." And then, seeing my face, seeing whatever was written on it, she said, "Oh, no. No. Is he?" And she couldn't finish, and I couldn't answer, and we just stood there in her doorway, two strangers breaking apart over the same man. I watched her fold into herself against the doorframe. This girl I'd never met, grieving my brother harder in that moment than most of our own relatives had at the funeral. And that told me, before anyone said a single word, everything I needed to know about what Gene had been to this family. You don't cry like that for a man who just came by now and then. You cry like that for father. Her mother came to the door then, Maria Reyes, older now, the widow from 20 years ago. And when she understood who I was and why I'd come, that Gene was gone. She put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she said, so softly, he never missed a Sunday. In 20 years, he never missed a single Sunday. We didn't know why he didn't come these last 3 weeks. We were so worried. We even called the hospitals. Her voice broke. We didn't know how to find you. He never told us much about his own family. I think he didn't want to trouble anyone with any of it. That was Gene. They brought me inside. And over the next few hours at their kitchen table, Maria and Sophia told me the story my brother had carried alone for 20 years, the story he could never tell any of us. And I'm going to tell it to you the way they told it to me, because my brother earned having it told right. After the accident, Maria said, she was destroyed. 29 years old, a widow, with a 2-year-old daughter, and no idea how she'd survive. And a few months after David died, a man showed up at her door. Quiet, uncomfortable, barely able to get the words out. It was Gene. He'd found their address. And he stood on her porch, and he told her who he was, the man who'd been driving the truck. And he said he'd not come to ask for anything or to be forgiven because he didn't deserve to be. He'd come because he couldn't live with doing nothing. He asked if he could help, in any way, for as long as she'd let him. Maria said her first instinct was to slam the door. This was the man who'd killed her husband, standing on her porch. She said she actually raised her hand to shut it in his face. But she said there was something in his face, not excuses, not self-pity, just a grief that matched her own, a man as broken by that night as she was. And she found she couldn't do it. She told him he could come back the next Sunday. Mostly, she admitted because she was drowning and didn't have the strength to refuse help, and she halfway expected him never to show. People say things on porches, she figured. He'd feel better for offering, and she'd never see him again. He showed. That next Sunday, and every Sunday for 20 years. At first, Maria said it was practical things, and it was awkward and it was hard. She'd hand him a list and disappear into the house because she couldn't bear to be near him, and he understood, and he never pushed. Gene fixed what was broken. He was good with his hands, like me. He brought groceries. He shoveled the walk in winter. He mowed the lawn all summer. He never overstepped, never asked for anything, never once tried to be anything he wasn't. He just showed up every Sunday and did whatever needed doing and drove 2 hours home in the dark. And slowly. This is the part Maria could barely get through. Slowly, the hate wore away because you cannot hate a man who keeps showing up for 20 years asking for nothing. It took her years, she said, but somewhere in there, the man who took her husband became the man who saved her family. She said, I don't know how to explain it to you. I lost my husband that night. And that same night, though it took me a long time to see it, God sent me the most faithful friend I've ever had. In the same man. I stopped trying to make sense of it a long time ago. I just loved him. And slowly, over years, he became family. Not a replacement for David. Maria was careful to say that. And I understood it, but something all his own. He was there for Sophia's first day of school. He was in the audience at every recital, every game, every school play, sitting in the back, always in the back, never wanted to be the center of anything. He paid for things quietly. Sophia told me, crying, that she found out only when she was older that Uncle Gene had paid for her braces, her school trips, and then, when the time came, every dollar of her college tuition. He'd set up a fund for it when she was still small, back when he was a young machinist who had nothing. A machinist's salary, and he'd spent 20 years funneling it into the future of a girl he wasn't related to by a single drop of blood, because he'd taken her father from her, and this was the only way he knew to try to give something back. Sophia said, and this is the part that I'll carry to my own grave, she said, I asked him once when I was a teenager why he did it, why he came every Sunday, and he told me, I took a man who was supposed to raise you. I can't ever give him back, but I can make sure you're not raised without somebody who'd do anything for you. It's the only payment I've got. The only payment I've got. She told me about her high school graduation 2 years ago, the one whose program I'd found in a shoebox. She said she'd walked across that stage and looked out into the crowd, and there was Gene in the back, in the only suit she'd ever seen him wear, and he was crying. This quiet, contained man who never showed anything, standing at the back of a high school gymnasium, weeping openly at the graduation of a girl who shared none of his blood. And afterward he'd hugged her, and he'd said, your dad would be so proud of you. I've been trying to be proud enough for two. And Sophia said that was the only time in 20 years he ever mentioned her father out loud. He'd carried David Reyes with him to every single one of those Sundays, and only let it show once because he couldn't hold it in anymore. My brother never married. He never had children of his own, never let anyone all the way in, because his whole heart, every Sunday, every spare dollar, every ounce of himself for 20 years was already spoken for. He'd given his life, quietly, completely, to a family that wasn't his as penance for one terrible second on the ice. And he did it without ever once telling a living soul who knew him. He never took credit. He never wanted it. He didn't do it to look good or feel good. He did it because he believed all the way down that he owed it, and he paid it every Sunday for 20 years in silence. And I had spent those same 20 years thinking my brother was selfish. I sat at that kitchen table, and I wept for the things I'd said to him. The christening, our mother's birthday, the joke about a second family. And my God, in a way, that's exactly what it was, wasn't it? A second family. The one he was quietly holding up with both hands while the rest of us shook our heads at him. I'd had it so wrong. We all had. The quietest, most closed off, most seemingly selfish man in our family had been, in secret, the most generous human being I have ever heard of. I thought about all the times I'd been annoyed at his silences, his checked watches, his early exits. I'd read them as a man pulling away from us. They were a man being pulled towards something so heavy and so holy he couldn't put it into words. Every closed look I'd resented was Gene carrying 20 years of a dead man's family on his back, alone, and never letting the weight of it show. I'd looked at my brother 1,000 times and seen a lonely, guarded man I felt sorry for. And the whole time, he was the richest man I knew, rich in the only way that lasts, in a love so total he gave his entire life to it and asked for nothing, not even to be understood. Maria showed me one more thing before I left. She said Gene had given it to her years ago and told her to keep it and to give it to his family someday, if they ever came asking. It was a letter in his neat machinist's hand. I won't read you all of it, but there was one line I've memorized. He wrote, I know what I did. I've never asked anyone to forgive it, least of all myself. But if I show up every Sunday for the rest of my life, then maybe when it's over, the account won't be quite so far in the red. That's all I'm trying to do. Just even out a little, one Sunday at a time. Just even it out, one Sunday at a time, for 20 years. He wrote something else in there, near the end, that I think about every single day now. He wrote, nobody knows about this, and I'd like it to stay that way while I'm alive. Not because I'm ashamed, because the second somebody calls you a good man for a thing like this, it stops being about her and starts being about you. And this was never about me. That was my brother. He understood something most of us never will, that the moment goodness gets an audience, it curdles a little, and the only truly clean way to do a good thing is where no one can ever see it. He did the cleanest good thing I've ever known, and he almost got away with it, too. He took it nearly to his grave. If it weren't for a high odometer and a mechanic brother who couldn't help doing the math, he'd have carried the whole beautiful secret into the ground. Now let me tell you what I did, because it's the only part of this story that's about me, and it's the only thing that lets me sleep. Now I go on Sundays. I couldn't let it end. I couldn't let 20 years of my brother's Sundays just stop like a debt marked unpaid when he'd worked so hard to pay it. So I drive the 2 hours south. Not out of guilt, the accident was never mine, but out of something I don't fully have a word for. Love for my brother, I think. I need to keep his hands on the thing he built. Sophie is a young woman now, grown and thriving, and she doesn't need shoveling or groceries anymore. But she and Maria are my family now, the way Gene made them family. We have dinner. We talk about him. Sophia calls me Uncle Mike. And a couple of Sundays a month, I make that drive that my brother made 1,000 times, and I understand a little more each time about what those miles cost him and what they meant. My wife came with me the second time. And my kids and grandkids know the whole story now. I made sure of it because I decided that my brother spent 20 years refusing to let anyone tell him he was good, and I wasn't going to let his own family keep failing to see it, not even after he was gone. My grandkids know about Great Uncle Gene and his Sundays. They know what he did. When they're older and the world tries to teach them that the loud, flashy people are the ones who matter, they're going to have the story of a quiet machinist who drove 230,000 miles in secret to hold up a family he loved and never once asked to be thanked for it. That's the inheritance Gene actually left. Not money. That. I sold his car in the end. I had to. But before I did, I took the odometer reading down and I wrote it in a notebook because that number is the truest thing my brother ever wrote. 230,000 miles. Most of them the same road, over and over to the same door. A whole second life, a whole secret act of love, recorded in nothing but miles by a man who never said a word. I keep that notebook in my toolbox at the shop now. When a customer's giving me a hard time, or I'm tired, or the world's feeling mean and small, I open it and I look at that number. 230,000 miles of a man quietly doing the right thing where nobody could see. It sets me straight every time. 40 years I've spent reading the truth in cars that people try to hide from me. I always thought that was just a mechanic's trick, but my brother taught me too late what it really means. Because the truest things about a person are almost never the things they tell you. They're the things they do quietly over and over when no one's watching and no one's keeping score and there's no credit in it at all. That's where a life actually gets written. Not in the words, in the miles. I judged my brother for 20 years by the Sundays he gave us. I never once imagined he was spending them becoming the finest man I'd ever know. So here's what I want to ask you, and I mean it with my whole heart. Somewhere in your life, there's a quiet one. Someone closed off, someone you've maybe half judged the way I judged Gene, someone whose silences you filled in with the worst story instead of the best one. Before it's too late, and I promise you it gets too late faster than you think, go find out what they've really been carrying. And if you've already lost someone like that, someone you only understood after they were gone, tell me about them down in the comments. Tell me their name. Let's give these quiet ones a little of the credit they spent their whole lives refusing to take. If this story meant something to you, do me that kindness. Subscribe, hit like, and this Sunday, call the quiet person in your family. Just to say hello. You never know what they're driving 2 hours to carry, all alone, every week, and never telling a soul. I'll see you next time. Drive safe.